The girl with blonde hair and incredibly beautiful blue eyes always considered herself a very happy person. Her name was Diana L. Parash. She was the only daughter of the Marquise, and opposite her stood Calypso Ernest, Grand Duke of the House of Ernest. The girl considered herself lucky because her father was too caring towards his daughter, and she was even able to outgrow the usual age for marriage in her status. Despite the fact that she eventually married the Grand Duke, the girl still remained happy, even if it was not a real marriage, but just for papers. Their love was not at all very passionate, but it was calm and persistent and lasted quite a long time. So soon in this happy marriage, Diana became pregnant. How they had a child named Catherine, and when the girl met her beautiful daughter, she became even happier. Her daughter Catherine was absolutely everything in the world to her. She became her universe, and the girl did not even know how she would live without her. These were truly happy days, when Diana enjoyed every moment spent with her dear husband and daughter. However, one day, when she went out for a walk with Catherine, she suddenly heard crying. The girl was sitting somewhere in the bushes. She fell down and was crying all over. Her dress was completely dirty, and Catherine kept calling for her mother. In fact, it was unusual dirt. It was located next to the bushes, namely the grass, which was poisonous, and for this reason, Catherine completely lost her sight. No one knew how to help her. They quickly brought the girl back to the estate. She lay on the bed and cried all the time. Catherine turned to her mother and asked if this meant that she would never again be able to see the beautiful flowers or those charming birds that always sing beautiful melodies. The woman then came up and started to stroke her girl. Of course, she was unbelievable. It was a pity that something like this happened to her daughter. She looked at Alicia, who was leading all this, and asked if there really was nothing that could be done. The woman with red hair just stood there for a while and thought, however, when Diana turned to her again, she looked down and sighed heavily. Alice said that she had heard that it was possible to transfer vision to a person using holy power, and as soon as Diana heard about it, her crying stopped. But tears continued to flow down her cheeks. The woman seriously thought about it, but then she asked their assistant to prepare the wheelchair for the temple. She was really going to do it because she did not want her daughter to live without sight. Calypso, as soon as he heard this, was immediately indignant. He went up to his wife and asked what she was planning. He could not believe that she really wanted to do this. However, Diana came closer to him, and smiling happily, she said that she loved their daughter more than anything in the world, even more than her own life. And when they finally did it, Diana was left without sight, just like her daughter Catherine, as soon as she was poisoned by this herb. The woman saw complete darkness in front of her. Of course, it was a little scary for her, but she understood that all this was good because she did it for her daughter, and it calmed her down. Quite a lot of time had passed since then, and it was quite difficult for Diana to adapt. But everything was really fine with her. There were people around the woman who were always happy to help her. Alicia was an old friend from childhood, and also a personal friend of Diana. She cared for her more tenderly than ever, and was always ready to help. Everything was getting much better since the woman gave her sight to her daughter, and this continued until she overheard one conversation completely by accident. She heard the voice of her husband, who was confessing his love to someone, and after that, she heard a gentle female voice who was telling him the same thing in response. They exchanged tenderness for a while. Then Diana opened the door. She turned to her husband and asked if it was true that this had just happened, some kind of misunderstanding. Until the very end, she could not believe that Calypso, whom she loved with all her soul, and with whom she gave birth to a child, could cheat on her. The man and his mistress stood at a short distance from her. There was silence between them for a while, but after that, the woman suddenly giggled, and this was a big blow for Diana. She couldn't stay on her feet and immediately fell to the ground. All the while, she was screaming Calypso's name and trying to understand how this could have happened. However, then she heard that unknown female voice again, which asked the men whether the woman sitting opposite them was not a complete idiot to ask such questions. Diana could no longer contain her emotions. She cried bitterly, and the woman, continuing to smile, said that even after he gave such clear hints, she still did not understand anything. The mistress considered Diana a real stupid woman, and she in turn could not even see their faces. She just sat on the floor and addressed the capella. Of course, she didn't want all this to be true. But at that moment, she heard his cold voice, which addressed the guard and asked them to take the woman out. After this, Diana was grabbed with a death grip, and they began to lead her out of the room. She didn't even try to resist, because she understood that it was useless. Then the woman was brought to some very dark abandoned room and left there completely alone before finally leaving. The knights said goodbye, calling the woman the former Grand Duchess. For quite a long time, Diana simply sat in the corner and cried. However, when she no longer had the strength, she thought about how many days had passed since she was locked in this unknown place for her. And besides, she was interested in who was constantly giving her such dirty and dry bread. But even if it was tasteless, she was still happy with the food that did not kill her. Of course, Diana assumed that it was most likely her daughter Catherine, who was incredibly worried about her, and therefore found her in order to at least feed her. The woman also hoped that everything was okay with her, and that she would not cry, because her mother was not there. Unfortunately, the same could not be said about Diana herself. She was now very often sad. In fact, she had promised herself to protect this girl, but in the end, she simply failed to cope with this task. But then suddenly, someone came into her room. She heard footsteps and immediately stopped crying in anticipation of what was about to happen next. Then Diana heard a female voice, which asked with disgust if she was still not dead. As soon as the woman heard this, she could not believe her eyes, because she knew perfectly well that this voice belonged to her daughter Catherine. Catherine turned to her mother again and asked why she had not died yet, since they had expected that she would have committed suicide earlier. But after that, another voice was heard, which belonged to the red-haired woman. She said that she already thought that she had died a long time ago from hunger, but she was wrong. Diana recognized this voice because it belonged to Alice. The woman could not believe that this really happened. She immediately stood up and ran towards the woman. However, Alice simply stepped aside, and thus Diana was unable to stay on her feet and fell straight to the ground because she could not see anything. She glanced at Diana and called her silly, while her daughter Catherine began to giggle as if something really interesting had happened. After this, Alice said that Catherine was not her daughter at all. As soon as Diana heard this, she was shocked. She could not believe that the woman really allowed herself to say such a thing, because it was impossible. Before she could say anything else, the girl suddenly spoke again. She told her mother to stop this already, because all she had to do was pretend that she was blind, and Diana was so stupid that she simply gave her her eyes. Diana's whole body began to shake from hopelessness. She said that this could not be true. If Catherine was not her daughter, then what was it? Well, Alice didn't continue listening to all this. She simply called her assistant, who took the woman and threw her over his shoulder in order to carry her away. After some time, they threw Diana into a new room, after which she again heard Alice's voice, who asked who dared to cast doubt on her orders as the new mistress. She didn't understand who was so idiot as to decide to give the woman food. Diana slowly, with trembling hands, pulled herself up to the cloth that had been covering her all this time. She thought that it could help her. Alice, meanwhile, continued to speak. She said that even after living her whole life as a humble servant, she still thought that blood was impossible to hide. At that moment, Diana, touching this blanket, felt someone's cold body. It belonged to her real daughter, Catherine, who had been dead for a long time. Alice continued speaking, and said that of course the woman could not understand that she was not a real daughter who had been switched at birth. Well, at least the woman gave Diana the grace to die with her real daughter, after which she took the fake Catherine as a friend, and they both left the woman alone with her grief. Diana, meanwhile, continued to hug the dead body of her daughter. She could not believe that all this was really true and did not know how to live on. During this entire time, there was a woman in the carriage. She kept shouting her daughter's name. She cried. She asked her for forgiveness for not being able to protect her, even though she promised. All this time, Diana was screaming, crying, hugging the dead Catherine, and asking her for forgiveness because she felt guilty. And even though she was such a pathetic mother, Catherine still tried to protect her because of this Diana. It got even worse. She couldn't believe that all this was real. The woman lay there for quite a long time and hugged her daughter. and she also turned to her and asked if she could come to her again in another life. Diana was ready to swear on her own life that she would never again allow something like this to happen to her daughter. She would really like the girl to forgive and understand her. And when some time had passed since that moment, Diana suddenly woke up, but she was no longer in a dark basement, but in a bright, luxurious room. However, what surprised the woman most was the fact that she could see the light despite the bandage that was on her eyes. She actually felt it. Then Diana looked at her hands and looked around, completely not understanding what was happening then. It was really something strange and unusual. But at that moment, a maid came into her room. She opened the curtains, and then suddenly Diana turned to her. The woman turned around and immediately saw that the mistress had woken up and smiled happily, wishing her good morning. Diana decided that it was just a dream, because everything around was too bright. She turned to the maid and asked if she by any chance knew what day it was. The maid immediately named this day, and then Diana thought that it was really strange, because it was the day when she lost her sight. But Alicia should have killed her. The woman believed that she could not survive that death by starvation, and then suddenly she realized that she had somehow been able to travel back to her past without even damaging her eyesight. Diana understood that if this was true, it meant that she could still save her dear daughter, who needed her help. Diana decided that this was her chance. She immediately sat up on the bed and asked the maid to take her to a certain place. The maid immediately extended her hand and began to help her get up. She also said that she would like to help her get to the place where she was going. Diana herself was very interested in what Alicia was going to do this time. Since her original plan had failed, the girl could see. As soon as the girl had gathered absolutely all the maids in order to discuss something with them, one of the main ones said that everyone was already gathered, so she could begin. Diana turned to them and apologized for calling them when they still had so many responsibilities, but she just had to do it. The girl also thought that Alicia had exactly said then that her daughter had grown up as a servant in the estate of the Grand Duke, and that it was for this reason that she was going to find out everything. These rough, very calloused hands that once gave the girl bread could have been the hands of her daughter, and she would not even suspect it. And she was about 15 years old, the same age as Catherine. It was a very small hint, but Diana did not lose hope and decided to begin her search. The girl smiled and immediately said that the reason she called them that day was because they themselves knew that she had lost her sight and therefore wanted to ask for help in further communication. The maids immediately began to talk among themselves. One of them said that the girl had indeed said the same thing that Alice had mentioned to them. The girls were talking among themselves, and Diana heard it all perfectly well. When she looked at the faces of the maids, she could not recognize them at all. They were all unfamiliar to her. Then she realized that this meant that all the maids of the estate had been replaced as soon as she lost her sight, because but she had never seen any of these ladies before. Diana stood in the middle of the room and heard the maids discussing her situation. They could not believe that the Duchess was now blind and could properly manage the estate. Then the girl felt even more pain from how much she trusted Alice. Then she could really believe that the girl was sincerely helping her and worrying. However, Diana was now fully aware of the fact that all this was only part of her pre-calculated plan. The girl decided that she should not under any circumstances allow her to control her anymore, so she said that since she had already given the instructions, she would like to go on. The maid who woke up, the lady immediately said that there were no problems there. She didn't have to worry. Everything should have been fine. After this, the girl thought about the fact that nothing serious had happened, so she believed that there was no need for us to tell Mrs. Alice about what Diana had asked. Then one of the maids began to help the woman go upstairs, and just then, a girl with blonde hair was coming down from the second floor. It was Catherine. As soon as Diana saw her, she was very surprised. But she was blind, so she should not have shown it under any circumstances. And at that moment, Catherine came up to her and waved her hand right in front of her eyes, thereby checking whether the woman really had not seen anything. Diana, who had vision in this life, was very surprised. She could not believe that she actually checked all this. Well, after that, the girl happily smiled and turned to the lady, showing her to behave quietly. After that, she stepped on Diana's dress. The woman continued to walk further. But because her dress got caught, she could not stay on her feet and fell straight down the stairs. Catherine, as soon as she saw this, immediately laughed. She was really very happy that she had managed to do such a disservice to this woman. Listen, Anka at that very moment immediately approached the lady and said that she should have been careful, and also asked if everything was okay with her, and suggested that she simply missed a step and fell because of that. Diana at that moment continued to lie on the earth, but in fact she really loved Catherine more than anything in the world, and for her sake she even sacrificed her sight. However, now this girl was not her daughter at all. Diana's life had become complicated. A husband, a traitor, who fell in love with her best friend, and also a fake daughter who replaced her real one. All this was too much. Diana was well aware of the fact that she had to change reality as quickly as possible. She was also aware of the fact that this company was going to kill her at any moment. The girl finally tried to get up from the floor, but felt a sharp pain in her leg. Diana was very scared. She thought that, in a situation like this, she did not know how she could even find her dear daughter, whom they had carefully hidden. When she returned to her room, suddenly someone knocked on her door. The girl, approaching the door, immediately allowed her to enter. She was wondering who suddenly decided to come to her. Then the door opened, and Calypso and Alicia appeared on the threshold. The two of them smiled and began to approach the woman rather quickly. The man looked completely uninterested, but he turned to his lady and asked how she felt. Alicia, meanwhile, stood quite close to him and simply smiled. Diana, adjusting the bandage, said that if you don't take into account the fact that she couldn't see now, then everything was fine with her, and the girl herself, seeing them together, didn't understand how they could do such a thing, and even pretend as if nothing had happened. Then Calypso suddenly grabbed the woman by the waist, and looking straight into her eyes, told Diana that it was a great relief for him. He really believed that his wife was no longer seeing, and he could calmly exchange pleasantries with his mistress. He began to move closer to Alice in order to kiss her on the lips, and before that, he said that he was very glad to hear that everything else was okay with her. And Diana, as soon as she saw this, was shocked. Tears immediately began to flow down her cheeks, because she could not believe that they allowed themselves to do such things right in front of her face. Calypso, after a short kiss with his lover, said that it must have been incredibly difficult for her to adapt to her new life, and also said that if she needed something, then of course she could just say it, and he would do it right away. The girl was starting to get very irritated by all this. She thought that they were liars and dirty hypocrites. For Diana, such behavior was unacceptable. While this sweet couple continued to kiss, she suddenly turned to her husband and said that she actually felt a little tired that day and asked if he could leave. Calypso immediately smiled and said that of course he didn't want to bother her anymore, and also asked that she have a good rest and gain strength. After that, the door opened, and they finally went out. Diana was left alone. She understood that she could no longer be in that room, so she opened the doors to the balcony and went out there to get some fresh air. The woman continued to cry bitterly. She had never felt more humiliated than at that moment. Then she firmly decided for herself that she was never going to forgive him again. After she finally calmed down, Diana went to the bookcase. She found a blank sheet of paper and a pen and immediately wrote a short letter there. In fact, she was counting on the fact that Calypso would simply wait and then watch as she slowly began to destroy what they had built between themselves. In fact, Diana was born into a wealthy Marcus family, and she spent her entire life spreading love to other people, and it brought her extraordinary pleasure. She often visited orphanages and volunteered there, and was also involved in various charity events that helped poor residents. Diana always adhered to the rule that the most important thing was not money or fame, but the people who surrounded you. Absolutely all the residents loved her very much, and many even imitated this woman. They really considered Diana an incredibly sweet and kind person, so they did not want to treat her badly. She was a saint in their family, a girl who was blessed by heaven itself. Diana's reputation spread even in the magic tower of the meritocratic society, where status had absolutely no meaning. In fact, after the woman received a blow below the belt from her husband and best friend, she immediately wrote a letter to one of these towers. And one fine sunny day, it came there in the office, sat a wizard who was reading various books. He had red hair, and he was immersed in studying new information. When the man knocked on the door, he immediately allowed entry. It was one of his servants. He turned to the gray man and said that a letter had just arrived addressed to him. The man, upon hearing about this, was immediately very surprised and asked who this letter could have come from, since he had not seemed to have communicated with anyone recently. His assistant replied that it was a letter from the Marquise and that it said that they were looking for a teacher. Roy, upon hearing this, immediately put the book aside. He asked what that meant. Then his assistant replied that they wanted her daughter to study magic, and the man also asked if what Roy had heard about this girl, the saint of the house of Parasha, was true. The last guy, after a long silence, asked if they could just send some average mage to handle this role. However, Roy immediately said that this could not be done. He took the letter in his hands and, smiling happily, said that he was going to go there on his own. He was a rather attractive young man. His hair was below his shoulders, and his eyes were shining bright blue. Of course, as soon as his assistant heard that he was going to go there on his own, she was incredibly surprised, because the guy usually didn't take on such things. Quite a lot of time has passed since then. One day, Diana was sitting at her desk, holding a small flask in her hands. In fact, she was wondering who they were going to send to her as a teacher. Since her letters were strictly monitored, Diana had to disguise it so that it simply sounded as normal as possible so that her father would immediately understand what exactly she wanted. The magic and alchemy that she studied as a child turned out to be very useful, and for this reason, Diana decided to improve her knowledge a little so that if something happened, she could protect herself. The girl stood up from her seat. She went to the bookcase again and thought about the fact that she had promised herself to give up magic when she got married. The woman truly believed that it was completely unnecessary. However, now that she was thinking about her future, she realized that she needed to start at least with the basics and gradually build up her skills. Since she only studied the basics as a child, she couldn't remember everything perfectly, so she wouldn't even refuse a free lesson. After a short time, she spoke loudly to the maids, who always sat next to her room and were ready to come at any moment. One of the maids, who was completely unhappy with the fact that she was woken up, entered the room. The maid turned to Her Highness and immediately asked how she could be of service. Diana then asked her to tell Alice and Catherine to come to tea with her, and this was to happen immediately. As soon as the maid heard this, she was very surprised. She immediately apologized and asked if she really wanted this. But the woman, in a rather rude voice, immediately asked if she had really heard her poorly, despite the fact that Diana had a smile on her face. This voice inspired fear. The maid was amazed. She could not understand whether it was really the same person who was there yesterday, since Diana behaved a little differently than before. The maid was a little alarmed at some point, but then the mistress suddenly asked why she had not answered. Did she really dare to doubt her mistress's orders? The maid immediately said in a nervous voice that this was not at all the case, after which she began to leave and said that she was immediately ready to carry out her order. And so, when some time had passed since then, they sat down outside. The maid prepared several desserts, as well as fresh tea. Alice sat opposite Diana and said that she was incredibly sorry that the woman could no longer see, but she believed that she could already begin to get used to such things, and for this reason, it was a little easier for her. As soon as Diana heard this, she was immediately very surprised because she did not understand whether it was a compliment or something else, but she thanked her friend. In fact, Alice was the Duchess's closest and most beloved childhood friend. They were always together and never betrayed each other. When Diana heard that she was to come to this estate as an exclusive doctor, of course they were both incredibly happy to hear this news. The girls were separated for quite a long time, but when they were reunited again, Diana believed that nothing better could have happened. However, now that she knew what end was ultimately awaiting her from this friendship, she considered it all nonsense. At that moment, a girl who claimed to be Diana's daughter, Catherine, approached them. She immediately greeted them and took her seat. Diana could hardly believe that the woman she considered her best friend could turn her daughter into a servant and her own child into a noble lady. She thought it was very mean, but suddenly, as soon as Diana heard that Catherine had arrived, she immediately began to play her role. She jumped to her feet and immediately joyfully shouted her name. However, she grabbed the tablecloth so hard to keep from falling that she accidentally knocked over the teapot, which contained a lot of fresh hot tea. Due to the strong push, this teapot spilled right on Alice. She was incredibly hot. She immediately screamed loudly, and the maids who were nearby were in a panic. They had no idea what they were supposed to do in such a situation. But at that moment, Catherine suddenly screamed at her mother and said that their doctor was injured because of her. Diana, in turn, made a surprised expression on her face and said that she was really very sorry. She had not intended to do that. After this, the woman lowered her head down and said that she was still not used to the fact that she could no longer see, and for this reason sometimes lost her orientation. Alice, as soon as she heard this, immediately got angry. She mentally called this girl abusive words, and after that, she tried to calm down so as not to give herself away. She tried to keep her voice calm and said that everything was fine, and she just needed to go and get her burn treated, which was why she had to leave them. Diana immediately said that there was no problem with it, and also wished her to take good care of herself. After this, the maids quickly began to clean up what had spread, and Diana sat opposite her daughter in complete silence. After this awkward silence, the woman turned to Catherine and said that she wanted to ask her something. The girl, of course, was not interested in this conversation, but immediately asked what exactly. Then Diana asked if she could help her with the morning procedures. From the moment the girl heard this, she immediately became indignant and said that, of course, there were roots for this, and she did not understand why she had to do this work. Diana explained that she would really like her to read to her every morning in her beautiful canary-like voice. The girl was even more irritable as soon as she heard this and asked if she couldn't handle it on her own. But the woman forced a smile onto her face and said that, in fact, her mother had given her her eyes. And for that reason, of course, she could not read. Of course, Catherine was even more angry about all this. She considered it a very boring activity and did not know how she could get out of this situation. When the girl realized that she had no choice, she banged her fists on the table out of anger and told her mother that she agreed to this. She also responded in a completely insincere voice that if she could help her in any way, then of course she was ready to do it. Diana immediately smiled and said that, in that case, she could already be free, and they would see each other the next morning as soon as she woke up. Some time passed since then. Alice came to Calypso. She lay down in his arms and said that her leg still hurt because of the woman who did such a clumsy thing. The man hugged his beloved even tighter and said that it must have been very painful for her, and that he was very sorry that she had to go through this. After that, he asked her to let him see how bad the injury was, and the girl immediately giggled, flirting with him, and asked how he was going to explain all this to Diana if she came in. Calypso reached his hand to the girl's knee and said that she didn't have to worry. Diana definitely shouldn't have come there, so they were alone. However, before they could say another word, the door to the room suddenly opened, and of course his wife came in and addressed the man. Clip saw her and was very scared. He immediately jumped to his feet and asked what she was doing in this place. What could have brought her? In fact, he was really very worried, because he was sure that Diana should not have come to his office, because she was not that kind of girl. She always said that she did not want to bother him, and therefore almost never showed up there. And he even suspected the fact that she might have noticed something, and for this reason became more vigilant towards him. The man, of course, allowed her to enter. Diana sat down next to him and began to cry loudly. She turned to him and said that the maids had all ignored her. She also said that they whispered behind her back, calling her blind great book, and this of course offended her. She continued to cry bitterly and said that she could not stand it any longer, and that she wanted to fire them all because she believed that they were doing the wrong thing. Alice, who was sitting next to the man, was very surprised to hear this. She could not believe that the girl really wanted to fire them, and she had paid so much to bribe all these ladies. She began to look at Diana aggressively, but at that moment, the Calypso suddenly waved his hand right in front of her face, making it clear that she needed to leave. The man did not want them to be suspected in any way. Therefore, Alice stood up from her seat and looked at the girl for the last time with all her hatred. When she walked out the door, Diana was left alone with the Calypso and asked the man to call the maids she had brought with her when she got married. The man asked with a smile on his face if she hadn't said that she had sent them away because she needed someone more reliable. Diana sighed heavily and then said that, in fact, she was right in saying this. But in that case, she could have contacted the Marquis' estate herself and chosen other maids, but definitely not these ones. But then suddenly, Calypso asked her to wait for a while. He turned the girl towards him and looked straight at the place where her bandage was. When he looked at this face, he clearly noticed that she looked exactly like the Marquis of Paresh, and therefore he realized that he simply could not become attached to this woman. In fact, the guy chose this girl only because she was the daughter of the Marquis, and all because his power was inferior only to the Emperor. He had no other reasons for this. Fortunately, Diana, who was completely narrow-minded, turned out to be very useful to him, and for this reason, he was easily able to use her to his advantage. From the moment they got married, the Marquis' estate began to provide enormous financial support in the form of various decorations and money. Of course, Calypso was incredibly happy because thanks to the support of the Marquis, they were able to avoid bankruptcy, which was very serious. And besides, at such speeds, if the support continued, he could even open a new business for himself. However, in the end, everything turned out differently than the man had expected. He really wanted Diana's father not to interfere in his affairs, but to simply support him financially. But that was not the case. The Marquis wanted to control the guy. He was going to examine every case and study the smallest details so that everything would be fine. Of course, Calypso was very angry about all this for this reason. He had to treat the Marquis calmly, and the men had to deal with this matter with the maids, because he could not allow this to reach the ears of the girl's father. So after a short silence, he asked if it would be enough for her to just call Shane and Milana. He believed that they were her closest maids, and they could fix this situation. As soon as Diana heard familiar names, she immediately ran up and hugged the man. She happily thanked him and said that it was really very valuable to her. In fact, she was really happy because this was only the beginning of her insidious plan, which she had already thought out well. When several hours had passed and night had come, she was sitting in her room by candlelight and reading some books. Every night she studied the necessary information in order to develop her plan even more thoroughly. And when she finally finished reading one chapter, she put the book aside and decided to finish the lesson for that day. Diana noticed that during all this time, no one even came to check on her, which meant that the servants did not care at all about the fact that she was completely alone in the room and was already dying of hunger. Of course, this Diana was a little sad, but she decided that it was not the most important thing. She was going to fire all the maids tomorrow anyway, so she should not have any more troubles. Before the girl was reborn, she had to fast for quite a long time, so the fact that she missed dinner that day was not a big problem for her. Diana stood up and went to the balcony to look at the beautiful night local history. But as soon as she went out, a very strong wind blew, and the girl's usual blindfold even flew off her eyes. She didn't understand why this wind had risen. It was truly amazing. The girl could barely stand on her feet. But in fact, the wind was so strong that even her body began to be carried away somewhere to the side, and she was also wearing heels. But at that moment, right in front of Diana, the same wizard with red hair appeared and grabbed her by the shoulder, preventing the girl from falling. Looking at her, he smiled happily and said that it was a big surprise for him that his very first student was such a beautiful lady. This guy appeared out of nowhere. He greeted the girl and said that he was very glad to meet her. When the wind died down, Diana looked at him in surprise and immediately asked in a trembling voice who he was. And Roy, smiling happily, said that her father sent him as a candidate for the next master of the Tower of Magicians. The guy also said that this could very well mean that he was now her teacher in magic and alchemy, so they must have been quite close. As soon as the girl heard about the candidate for the next owner of the Tower of Magicians, she thought about the fact that this was already too much. She decided that her father was truly hopeless since he sent such a person. The man suddenly handed the girl a small bandage and asked if it was really hers, and also asked why she was wearing it at all. Diana, having accepted this bandage, immediately said that in fact she lost her sight due to one incident. Roy, hearing this, was very surprised, and after that he was silent for a while. Then, thinking, he said that it was quite strange. Diana didn't understand why he thought it was strange, And then she thought about the fact that perhaps people couldn't deceive magicians, and for this reason, he learned the real truth. But then suddenly, the man smiled and said that he was just joking. Diana then became embarrassed. She thought that this man was rather suspicious and did not know what to do now. But soon she calmed down and realized that she could simply be grateful for not being caught. At that moment, the man came closer to her and helped her tie the blindfold. Diana replied that she could have done it herself, but she thanked him anyway. When she called him Master Roy immediately, smiling, said that she did not need such formalities. She could just call him by his name, and the girl replied that there was no problem with that. Then the man asked her what she was thinking about having classes once a week and having the lessons take place at noon. Roy immediately replied that he had come to the Grand Duchy and was ready to comply with her schedule. It would not be a problem for him if she chose any time and days. The girl also said that, as he himself had probably already noticed, she could not walk normally. But Roy, smiling, said that she did not have to invent any difficulties. They simply had to do it. And not as it would be convenient and comfortable for her. This was a priority. Then the girl replied that in that case, the rumors were true that the Magi did not stand at the ceremony. But the man immediately asked in surprise whether she really didn't like it, since he refused the ceremonial greeting. Well, Diana laughed and immediately said that of course it wasn't so. In fact, she really did consider it relaxing and even pleasant. She also added that she was looking forward to their lesson because she was really interested in what was going on. However, at that moment, she suddenly felt a severe headache. The girl could not stay on her feet. She immediately sat down on the ground. As soon as Roy noticed this, he was worried. The man asked if everything was okay with her, but Diana suddenly heard a voice in her head that said that he was going to start all over again. The girl did not understand at all what was happening, and it scared her very much, because something like this had never happened to her before. After this, Diana returned to her room, where the maids she trusted were already waiting for her. The girl with blonde hair even burst into tears. She said that all this was absolutely unfair. Another lady asked how this could have happened at all, and Diana actually told them what had happened to her. She took off her blindfold and said in a quiet voice that she understood perfectly well that it was hard to believe. But in fact, everything she said was true. She turned to the maids Milan and Shane and asked what they thought about this. The maids immediately asked what she planned to do now in this case. The girl, looking at them with her beautiful blue eyes, said that she was actually going to take revenge because she considered all this to be unfair. She also said that she was going to take revenge on all these terrible creatures, and she didn't care at all what it could cost her. She was ready to do anything. At that moment, Milan suddenly came closer to the lady. She knelt down, and her partner was very surprised when she saw it. But the girl looked Diana straight in the eyes and said that it must have been incredibly hard for her to bear all this time alone and feel completely useless to anyone. She finally calmed down and loudly declared that they had dedicated their entire lives to serving women, and therefore asked Diana to allow them to help her. Then Shane also sat on her knees. She, lowering her head down, said that no matter what Her Highness ordered, they were ready to do absolutely everything, because they felt their duty and responsibility for her. As soon as Diana heard these words, her soul felt incredibly pleased. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she thanked her wonderful maids for this. After that, she asked if she could ask both of them for one favor in that case. And so, after they had discussed all the details, the next morning, Diana gathered absolutely all the maids in the palace in one place. She prepared small bags and handed them out to absolutely everyone, saying that she was very happy to congratulate them on taking up a new position in the residence of the Grand Duke, which began that day. Then Diana held out the bag forward and asked if everyone had received their packages properly. When the maids all said that it was really so, the girl smiled and offered to open them and said that it was their salary for the month. As soon as the girls opened these bags, they were amazed. They could not believe that this was really their salary. For them, it was too much. Diana took out several precious stones from the bag and showed them to her new maids, saying that since she was the mistress of the Grand Duke's residence, she was ready to promise them. The lady promised them that from that day on, all of them who started working in the estate now deserved respect and care more than anyone else. She said she was going to treat the maids just like the beautiful jewels they had inside their bags, because she thought they deserved it. However, at that moment, she threw those precious stones to the ground and broke them with her heel. In a very stern voice, Diana said that she could only allow herself to behave like this on the condition that they did not start to cross the permitted boundaries. She asked them not to let her down, and also to remember that their only master was she, Diana, and no one else. The maids immediately and unanimously told the mistress that they understood everything and were definitely ready to fulfill their duties. Hearing this, the girl immediately smiled. She was pleased with the work she was able to do, and for this reason, she left the maids alone, and she herself went about her other business. The girl walked along the corridors, and behind her were her personal maids. And then suddenly, Diana heard someone address her. It was one of the old maids that she had thrown out that morning. The girl ran up to her, knelt down, and asked why she had thrown them out. She also asked what exactly they had done wrong. Her voice trembled, tears flowed down the maid's cheeks, and she asked the woman to take them back. But at that moment, one of the new maids suddenly stepped forward with a sword in her hands, and she stood in front of Diana and said this to the maid so that she would step aside. She spoke loudly, asking how she dared to touch the mistress without her permission. And all this was because the maid allowed herself to take the girl by the bottom of her dress when she begged for a refund. In fact, last night, Diana told Shane to assemble a new staff to work at the Grand Duke's residence, because all the current maids were to be fired. The maid immediately understood her job and was ready to do it. But Diana also asked that a knight be found for her. As soon as Shane heard this, she was amazed and asked if the knight they would request from the Marquis' estate would suit her. Diana, upon hearing this, immediately said that this was not so. It must have been someone who was not officially registered. As a knight, she planned to disguise her as a maid. And after that, Diana was going to trust her with an important task, and disguising herself as a maid would guarantee that no one would even suspect anything. After the knight's maid protected Diana, the woman herself came forward and told the Belinda to calm down, and that was enough. With a heavy sigh, she told her that since they themselves didn't even understand what they had done wrong, she certainly wasn't going to waste her precious time explaining it. Of course, these girls betrayed her for a handful of coins and sided with Alice, and she could not believe that now they all asked her for forgiveness. Of course, for Diana, such behavior was very low and hypocritical. She was going to make sure that they were never allowed into this place again under any circumstances, because she did not want to see these people for another second. However, at that moment, Alicia, who was standing nearby, was watching this whole scene. Of course, she didn't like this whole situation at all. She thought that the maids should have behaved better, but all they did was just try to protect their own asses. After that, she turned around and started to leave, thinking about the fact that she had a feeling that the further she went, the worse everything became, and this, of course, made her very wary. Meanwhile, Diana had finally returned to her office. She was sitting and looking at various questionnaires, and then suddenly her maid asked why she decided to spare the head maid, Julia. The woman immediately explained that she could know absolutely everything about Alicia's plan, so she asked the girls to watch her closely and report immediately if anything happened. The girls immediately answered that they understood everything. Then Diana asked Milana what happened with the task that she gave her. The girl sighed heavily and immediately said that she still had no news about her biological daughter, and also added that she was very sorry. Milana replied that, in accordance with her orders, she was looking for a 15-year-old girl with a thin build and hands as rough as tree bark, but such a girl was not found in the estate. She also said that just in case they were going to search the entire territory of the Grand Duchy as well. Diana, upon hearing this, immediately said that she was a good girl, and for this reason had to continue the search. The girl was a little worried, because it was really a big responsibility placed on her, but she said that she had no intention of letting the lady down. Diana, meanwhile, sighed heavily and immediately began to wonder where Alicia had hidden her dear daughter. After a short silence, she suddenly asked Shane to call Catherine into her office. The maid was very surprised by this, but immediately said that it would be done now. As soon as the maid came into Catherine's room, the girl became very angry upon seeing her and hearing the request. She asked if she really had to go there again, Shane replied that Her Highness said that she wanted to read a book, and that was the reason Catherine had to come. Well, as soon as the girl heard this, she became even more angry. She kicked the floor and said that she had already come this morning, so she didn't understand why she had to go again. But she didn't answer anything. She started to leave the room and said that since it was already noon, she had to leave and do her duties, and Catherine had to come to the office. The girl became even more angry because of this. She thought that since Diana couldn't see, in her opinion, she should have just lived quietly as a mouse and not disturbed everyone around her. Catherine also thought that when her mother was to become the Grand Duchess, someone like Diana would be a nobody, and she was already looking forward to the moment when this could finally happen. The girl got so angry that she even pushed her teapot off the table. It fell again and fell out of love. After this, Catherine suddenly went to the bookcase, knocked on it with her foot, and screamed loudly, telling someone to come out of there. Then the closet opened slightly, and a small, beautiful, fair-haired girl appeared from there. She immediately turned to the young lady and asked if she had called her. This girl was the real Catherine. And then the girl grabbed the poor little girl by the hair and told her to come out immediately. After that, she pushed her straight towards the teapot that had broken and told her to make sure that everything was perfectly tidied up for her arrival. Catherine called her Azriel and asked if she understood everything. The girl looked very tired and had bruises up to her neck, which meant that she had been beaten periodically. Of course, she said that everything would be cleaned up after that Catherine left and came to her so-called mother. As soon as she entered the room, she immediately turned to Diana and said that she was already there. The woman, meanwhile, was already sitting on the sofa, waiting for her daughter, and said that she was a little late. The girl asked her for forgiveness, and coming closer, said that she had completely forgotten about their promise, and that was the reason she was late. In fact, she acted much more friendly than usual because she believed that if she did this, Diana would soon finally let her go. Catherine came closer to her and smiling said that she fell asleep while reading and asked her mother if she could forgive her for this small mistake. But then suddenly, Diana turned to Catherine in a very stern voice and said that being late was being late regardless of the reason. Punctuality was the main quality of a woman, and asked if she didn't already know this. Catherine was shocked to hear this. She could not understand what had happened to her during all these days, but she said through gritted teeth that she knew it. Then Diana told her to sit down, and also asked that in the future, the girl keep her promises and be sure to come on time, because this was important. Catherine sat down opposite her and said that she would definitely do so. Then Diana put on the table the books that she was supposed to read to her that day. As soon as the girl saw such a large number of books, she immediately asked why there were so many. But Diana, smiling happily, said that she could no longer read books on her own, and for this reason she wanted Catherine to help her a little. Of course the girl didn't like all this, because she didn't want to waste her time so uselessly. But Diana replied that she really enjoyed it as soon as she heard her daughter's voice, and wondered if she could do it for her beloved mother. Catherine simply had no choice, and so she agreed. Some time passed since then, and the girl only read one book. She put it aside and turned to Diana. She told her mother that her throat was already incredibly sore, and she wanted to stop because she had been reading for several hours already. The woman immediately realized that this girl really always lacked patience. When she fell in love with her, she simply did not pay attention to it and did not even suspect that this could not be her daughter. However, Diana did not even expect that she could get back into place so quickly, so she was prepared even for such situations. The woman approached Catherine and said that she was 15 years old at the time and thought that she had raised her too grandly. After that, she asked if it was true that tomorrow young Lord Sawyer was supposed to visit the Duke of Iceberg's estate, and smiling, she said that she would have to cancel this meeting. It would be her punishment for what happened. As soon as Catherine heard this, she immediately jumped to her feet. She began to shout at her mother and asked what she meant when she said such a thing. But Diana replied that since she could not keep the promise she had given to her family, then of course she could not introduce such a lady to the young lord, who expected much from this meeting. The girl was incredibly angry about this, but in fact, she had been waiting for this day for too long just to be alone with this beautiful young lord. Her mother and father had absolutely nothing to do with the iceberg house. It was an opportunity that only one girl could have. In fact, they even started to negotiate marriage. If Catherine had known that this would happen, then of course she would have been able to hold out much longer so that Diana would not get angry. The girl could not hold back her tears. She cried bitterly, and suddenly she heard the voice of her mother, who had been with Ivan, who said that if she had listened to her carefully, she could have arranged another meeting with the young lord. The girl, upon hearing this, immediately became happy and asked if this was really true. Mrs. Rada smiled again and said that of course it was so. After all, Catherine was her favorite daughter, so she was ready to do anything for her happiness. Catherine immediately beamed with joy and told her mother that she would never be so late again and would definitely continue to read to her with great pleasure. The woman replied that this was very good, and she thought that it had been a little easier to get Catherine on her side than she had expected. The girl, meanwhile, took a new book and said that she was going to hurry up in order to continue reading to her as soon as possible. And so, when several hours had passed since that moment, Diana decided to go outside and take a little walk so as not to sit in the castle all the time. There on the street, of course, her knight accompanied her, and as soon as the girl saw Diana, she immediately asked if it was true that she had had her first lesson in magic that day. The lady smiled again and said that this was indeed the case, and her assistant replied that she was going to stand guard at the entrance to the garden, and if the girl needed anything, she could feel free to say so if necessary. Diana immediately thanked Belinda and said that it was really valuable to her, after which the girl went to the garden, where she had another meeting. When Diana entered the garden, she looked around and thought about how this place really turned out to be a very good place to hold the first lesson. However, then she looked at the time and noticed that it was almost time for the lesson, and she still hadn't seen her magician anywhere. Because of this, the girl even became a little wary. In fact, she told him the time, and the man, before leaving, replied that he would have come at the exact time without being late. She even thought about whether he should have appeared at all like last time on the balcony. This appearance was very impressive, but she decided that this time, even if he appeared in a similar way, she definitely would not have been surprised. And when the time they had agreed upon finally arrived, Diana looked up and saw her teacher in front of her, who had appeared there out of nowhere exactly on the dot. He smiled again and greeted the girl and decided to call her Nuna. It was more interesting for him, and Diana didn't object. When he stepped onto the ground, the girl also greeted Roy. He came closer to her and asked if everything was okay with her, because he had gotten up so hard that day and did not want her to suddenly feel bad again. The girl replied that she was fine, but she was a little surprised that he was actually expecting their lessons. But then Roy suddenly replied that she was his very first student, and it was a really great honor for him. The girl smiled, laughed nervously, and said that it was an honor for her too, but she herself did not understand why there was such a strong focus on this. Then the man turned to the side and asked if she was ready to begin their lesson in that case. The girl immediately said that she had been ready for a long time. Roy then asked what she wanted to start with: attack magic, defense magic, or magic that connects. He replied that she could choose absolutely anything that she liked, and that's exactly where they would start. Diana, as soon as she heard all this, immediately began to think, because it was a really difficult choice. She also wondered when the last time she used magic was, so she realized that she didn't remember anything at all, and suggested that he start with Sosnov, saying that it would be more reliable. The guy immediately smiled and said that there was absolutely no problem with this. Also seeing that she was a little embarrassed, he asked her to straighten her shoulders and thus be able to go step by step towards her goal. After that, Roy suggested that she go ahead and tell him that in that case they could start by releasing her mana, which was just the initial stage in learning magic. Then the man decided to show her first how to act. He waved his hand, and right there a fire appeared, which did not go beyond the palm of his hand. The man controlled and monitored this fire. As soon as she saw this, she was amazed, and Roy immediately asked if the girl knew that every mother had her own attribute. His attribute was fire. The man also explained that there were several of these attributes, including fire, water, ice, wind, lightning, and earth. And he said that she could only use the magic that matched her attribute. For this reason, the most important thing to start with was to find out which attribute belonged to her. And when he asked if she knew this, Diana immediately answered that her attribute was ice. The man replied that it was wonderful, and also asked her to try to do the same as he did in order to understand how strong her mana was. The girl turned her hand to the side, and only a few ice flows jumped out from there, which immediately melted, which made her feel very awkward because she had hoped for more. In fact, Diana didn't expect that she would succeed at all, but she found it quite difficult to breathe due to the fact that this was clearly not the result that Roy was going to see. But then suddenly he came up to her and took the girl by the hand and told her to relax her palm and concentrate on accumulating mana in one place. He held her hand for a while and said that the moment she felt the power at her fingertips, she simply had to open them sharply in order to release all the energy. Diana replied that she understood everything. After that, she did breathing exercises and thought that it was high time to concentrate and show him a good result. She immediately began to think about the energy that she felt and wanted to collect it on her fingertips. The girl had quite a strong force, and she was able to release her ice magic very beautifully and effectively. At that very moment, Calypso, who was nearby, heard all this and saw some light. He was very surprised. But Diana, in fact, did not expect that she would be able to do this. As soon as her strength was exhausted and snowflakes were still swirling around, she joyfully turned to the swarm and said that she had succeeded after all. The man smiled and said that she did it very well and even used a lot of mana, which is why it turned out so impressive. But before the girl could answer him, Calypso suddenly appeared behind him. He looked very angry and turned to the girl. The man began to approach her with quick steps and asked who this person was who was next to her. Diana tried to remain calm. She said that it was her magic teacher and his name was Roy. The man was immediately surprised and asked why she needed a magic teacher at all. And Diana then explained that as Calypso already knew, she had lost her sight and could no longer read books. For this reason, she would really like to try to study magic, and in the future, perhaps this would make her life easier without sight. For a moment, Calypso doubted. He looked at Roy, and Roy looked at him, and a very awkward and tense silence arose between them. The girl thought that this was all just funny. She couldn't believe that Calypso had actually decided that he had the right to feel jealousy towards her. She considered this feeling from such a person to be completely selfish, because he himself was having an affair with another woman. At that moment, the girl's hands suddenly began to tremble with anger, and Roy noticed this. However, at this point, Diana finally got control of her emotions. She turned to her teacher and, pointing towards Calypso, said that it was her husband, and also said his name. The red-haired guy immediately raised his hand up and greeted the man. There was nothing left to do but greet him back, even if he was very unpleasant to him. In fact, Calypso thought that this man had no manners at all, because he should have greeted the Duke differently, and this angered him even more. But Roy said happily, smiling, that if the guy continued to look at him like that, he would definitely drill a hole in the middle of his face with his gaze. At that very moment, their conversation was interrupted by Catherine, who came out into the street and turned to her mother and father, who were surprised that they were there. The girl ran up to them and, smiling, asked what they were doing in this place. As soon as Diana heard her voice, she immediately noticed that it sounded hoarse, due to the fact that she had been reading to her for quite a long time, for hours. The girl was really very pleased with her punishment. Then she turned to Catherine and asked her to come and greet their guest properly. She pointed her hand towards Roy and said that he was her magic teacher. As soon as Catherine saw him and heard who he was, she was very surprised. Roy, meanwhile, turned to the princess and said that this was all rather strange, because the girl was completely different from her mother, and usually children are exactly like her. Before anyone could answer, the Calypso suddenly shouted and asked how he dared to make such outrageous remarks. Roy, hearing this, was incredibly surprised and immediately asked what was wrong with it, because he simply told the truth. It was his observation that he voiced. The magician also said that this meant that the girl looked like her father, and it was strange. He smiled and asked what he found in this compliment from the rude. The Duke, meanwhile, realized that he was a little furious, and waving his hand, he replied that it didn't matter at all how great a magician he was. It still didn't give him the right to treat people of higher status than him like that. However, Roy at that moment asked the man to stop saying this. He used his magical abilities and was able to conjure a fire eagle, which flew straight to Calypso. The guy was incredibly scared when he saw him and immediately asked why he was doing this at all, and also asked him to immediately stop these tricks. But the magician replied that the status or dignity of the nobility was according to their standards and had absolutely nothing to do with the Tower of Magicians, and since the Duke said such things, it meant that he was not in the know.